Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And today we have Christopher join us and become our speaker, and he will talk about, in short, AI for XR. Thank you so much, and I will pass the baton to Christopher.
Thank you, Dominique, and good day, everyone, from wherever you are at today. And I'm certainly happy to be here with you, and I'll be sharing some slides coming up here in a moment, but I just wanted to take a few moments to express that it's super important now to have these type of organizations and platforms that we find ourselves at, and understanding emerging technologies, specifically vertically focused today on extended reality and artificial intelligence. But we'll be touching on a host of different topics today within this ecosystem, and we will go and dive into the eco-habitat of technology as well through eco-convergence. And so there's going to be a lot of information that's going to be distributed, but we're going to run for about an hour here, and then we're going to go into some Q&A if you have anything, and if not, we'll leave early and be done with it. But there's a lot of things that we're going to touch on that I think are going to be beneficial for all sectors, be it private and public, and even for startup culture. It's really important. My name is Christopher Lafayette, emerging technologist, humanitarian, hailing here from Silicon Valley. And I have the pleasure of being invited to speak at several different organizations. I'm part of different organizations and different boards. And for me, I really advocate at this intersection of technology and humanity itself. It's a career path that I'm very happy to be on, firmly fixed to, and with extreme fidelity. And because I just think it's just so important at this present time for us to make sure that we take humanity first in consideration for anything that we innovate, anything that we develop, build, hack, make, or code. And it's just where we're at right now. And as innovators and all of us that are sitting here in some kind of capacity, I know that you see the vast opportunity of what we have today in consideration of these emerging technologies that are accelerating in ways that we've never seen before, and we'll touch on that as well. And so at this point, what I want to do is I want to hop into this presentation, and I really want to lean and really set the tone here, because we're about to go deep. We're going to chop a lot of wood, and for the moment, we might just leave the planet. And so no hype, no fluff, just stuff. That's just where I'm at when it comes to speaking and expressing. And in some capacity, many of you are going to have different things on a micro scale and a microcosm that you're focused and working on. And it'd be great to hear some of those things towards the second half, if you will, of this session, and this little bit of time that we have together to be able to spend here on this Saturday. And so let me share my screen and move over to my slides, and we should be good. Does everybody see it? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so let's kind of roll in. So the title of this today is, as you see, Immersive AI and the intersection of artificial intelligence and extended reality. And so when we talk about AI, we talk about XR, and what we're really talking about are obviously two technologies, but we're not talking about products. You know, a lot of people come out here and say statements like the metaverse is dead. Well, first of all, the metaverse hasn't been fully composed to even be dead. And second of all, the metaverse is based on the science and applied science. And science doesn't die in that fashion. And so one of the things that I want to be mindful of is that the majority of what I'll be expressing and talking about today on a very rudimentary level and in its native state is talking about science, which is technology. And to really lean in on the understanding of what it is, what's its application, and what it means when we talk about intersectionality as a whole. And when we talk about intersectionality, what we're really talking about is that two things, or multiple, will come and meet at a dividing line, but have a conversion crossover and to be able to pair together. And when we talk about this in technology and technical terms, this is what we commonly refer to as the merged pairing, and we'll touch on that as well. And so one of the things I want to do early is set the tone for the trajectory of which we're going to go in when we're talking about, I would say a big part of the elephant in the room is this generative pre-trained transformers or large language foundational models. and talking about where we're at when it comes to simple AI, prospective AGI, and super intelligence. And we'll touch on a little bit of that. And I'm looking forward to it, really gaining hopefully a collective hive mind and leaning in and going forward on this. So grab some snacks, Trader Joe's snacks if you got them, and let's kind of go in here and have at it. So introduction, a glimpse into, let me minimize this real quick, a new reality. And so when we talk about extended reality, we must understand that that isn't necessarily limited and focused for virtual visualization. I know it's a technology that we've become familiar with when we talk about these things, and we talk about immersive technology and extended reality, and we tend to, as technologists and artists and creatives, we tend to look at XR specifically and limit it and fixed towards this industry, because in a lot of ways it was set as a colloquial term for us to be able to refer to the many different technologies that abide within immersive technologies within the eco-habitat. And when we talk about the eco-habitat of technology, one of the things that we want to understand is that all technologies abide within the greater eco-habitat. And within this eco-habitat, you'll have artificial intelligence, and that may be flanked by machine learning and deep learning and chatbots and smart assistants and neural networks. But we'll also have this terminology of extended reality. And as of late, we may see under that banner and under the auspice of extended reality, we'll see augmented reality and virtuality and mixed reality. Just heard someone mention about magically. And we'll have within that also haptics and physio haptics and all different things that operate within that specific vertical. And over here, we may find fintech, subsequent decentralization, DeFi, DAOs, dApps, blockchain, NFTs, so forth and so on. And over here, we may find robotics, where we have mechs, androids, and so forth and so on. And so all these technologies abide within the greater eco-habitat. But what happens when these technologies, which aren't new, what happens when these technologies that not only abide within the eco-habitat, but these technologies begin to scale? And not only scale individually, but scale at the self-same time. And not only scale at the self-same time, but at some point begin to become into the product delivery market. And typically what we see as technologists, and what we'll see on Gartner's hype cycle, peak of inflated interest, trough of disillusionment, slope of enlightenment, plateau of productivity, we'll look and we'll see these technologies that are to arrive and that are to come. And candidly, I've been a bit outspoken about this, Gartner's very limited in what it shows of what's to come, what's to arrive. And in a lot of ways, their trajectories are quite a bit off. Now, we'll not lean in too far on the hype cycle, but the cycle itself it's a very strong framework that they've developed. But we will tend to look at this and other technologies that aren't necessarily present on trajectories to come, and we'll think that that's all that we're dealing with. But in the reality, when we look at technologies such as generative pre-trained transformers, such as what we're looking at when it comes to NFTs, non-fungible tokens, you know, these technologies weren't new. These technologies all of a sudden just emerged into the market, coming straightforward from the eco-habitat itself. And so one of the things that I did early on is started to work on this framework of eco-habitat, and then subsequent have rolled out of late to different academic universities and different audiences, eco-convergence. And wanted to understand further about the eco-habitat and have an appreciable amount of understanding for when we talk about technology present day today, and when we as technologists are understanding what we're dealing with now and what might we be dealing with future come and near future and far future that's grounded in reality. I really wanted to take a step forward and not be reliant on media articles that tell me what technology is relevant, YouTube videos in terms of those that go on the market side and tell us what's available for product in the global market, which is fine, and it definitely serves as benefit. But many companies have found themselves in a disruption loop that technology, in a lot of ways, has accelerated. I said a few years ago, what happens when the technology becomes more advanced than the technologist? And now that's come to pass. Is that the tempo of technology has accelerated, the cadence of technology has accelerated, and we're not going back. And where we find ourselves today is that good technologies are superseded by great technologies, and great technologies are superseded by even better technologies, and that's what we commonly refer to as the disrupt. Now, when we talk about this disrupt, we must take in consideration that technology moves in increments, shifts, and leaps. And when we talk about increment shifts and leaps, what we're really talking about is evolutionary scale, which we'll be touching more on that as we move forward. It being that technology moves in these increments, shifts, and leaps, what we fashioned and called the 3 stages of technological progression. What's happened is that when we look at an increment, incrementation, or incremental development, that may be a new iOS update on your device or an Android update. And incremental development doesn't necessarily have mass impact to society and to civilization. It's something that's very narrow. It's something that's very short in its steps and micro in its scale, but effective and powerful nonetheless. I talk to some people say, well, Apple hasn't come out with anything new in a long time, say for Vision Pro, which somebody mentioned earlier, and we'll be talking about that. And say, well, take your iPhone 14 and replace it with an iPhone 8. It may not seem as evolutionary of what they've rolled out, but in incrementation, Apple has become arguably the biggest company on the planet, and no one does it better than them, unbiasedly. But then we move to shifts. Now, what separates increment from shift is that increment will often find it in software or very minor updates and adjustments to a hardware that's already on deck and on scene, a desktop, tablet, laptop, HMD. But when we talk about a shift, that means we have usually some type of new hardware that's come to scene, that's come on deck. It could be hardware that's within that specific vertical already, a new desktop, a new laptop, a new headset. Or it may be something that we've never seen before come to market. And that will undoubtedly impact more people than incremental development. A shift is something that's being introduced that's coming from the eco-habitat that's become a product. You know, often when we talk about science, the majority of science is still unknown to mankind. We don't completely understand all the things that abide and operate in this world, and even within our own physical bodies, and let alone what we don't understand when it comes to dark matter, dark energy, and baryonic energy. We know it's there, this 5%, but we can't necessarily discern and understand what that is. But when we start talking about physics, there's just things we simply just do not understand. But for that little bit that we do understand, we're able to go and take science and to create something out of that and create what we call products. And taking these products, we're able to understand and unlock even more about that which we don't understand of science in a very roundabout way. But shifts don't impact the whole entire civilization, but a leap. Now, we don't get those too often, but when it does happen, it's groundbreaking. Web 1, Web 2, Web 2.5, Web 3, the cloud, the metaverse, blockchain technology. These are technologies and systems that have the capacity in some fashion to shift and change the way that we operate as a whole in humanity. They are so impactful and game-changing to how we operate as a society in a global world that they begin to, in many ways, adjust the way that we operate moving forward as a species within this world and this earth plane, if I may put it like that. But we don't see those too often. But the thing is, now that the tempo and the cadence of technology has accelerated, we will expect to see more of these happen. And quite candidly, we'll start to see more leaps come to see in a very dramatic fashion. Increment shifts and leaps set the way and set the trajectory way forward when it comes to technical progress. And when we talk about increment shifts and leaps, and we talk about disruption, contemporary to our time, the greatest disruptor of late hasn't been technology. It's been a pandemic. It's been COVID-19. Regardless of whatever side you fall on the aisle of understanding what that is, we know that it exists. Everyone can agree with that. But the reality is that COVID-19 has been the greatest disruptor of technology of anything that we've seen in this modern age. We've become more virtual in the past 40 months than we have the past 40 years. So much of what we do and how we operate virtually has now converted and crossed over, but not fully, into virtual dealings, into what we call this hybrid economy, this hybrid world of work. We have not fully crossed over into full digital, but we are arriving closer by the day, closer by the week and month of entering further into what we call, and it's not colloquial, the metaverse, which is a virtual ecosystem of interaction and communication. But we're moving forward in this way, and the metaverse is not a single variable equation, it's a multivariable equation. And as we move forward in these virtual states of existence, being augmented or virtual, and now that we know in a lot of ways that the world has become machine readable, as we move forward, we will begin to see more of a merger of not just incremental development, but we'll be able to see, in a lot of ways, hardware that were things of fiction and fantasy. And these shifts on a morpho scale will be almost indiscernible to what we've ever known. Well, why do I say that? Because these technologies that abide within the eco-habitat are much more than what we realize. This is a framework that I've been distributing throughout this year and I've unleashed. And it's something that I've been working on for some time, and certainly not alone. But when we look at the eco-habitat, we tend to talk about technologies that are front-facing by way of publications and that we may get from PR campaigns. But let's be certain and sure that the reality is that we're dealing with much more than we realize. In fact, we're dealing with 54 technologies, minimum. And with each technology, 4 subsets per, which leads us to 270 plus technologies that abide and counting within the eco-habitat itself. Now, within this eco-habitat, you'll have artificial intelligence, extended reality, robotics. We talked about that already today, but did we talk about IoT and quantum? Did we talk about biotech, cybersecurity, cloud computing, energy technologies, data science, and 5G and beyond, each with its own subset? Did we go further in and start talking about space technology, autonomous systems, and digital health, and 3D printing, material science, nanotechnology, each with its own subset? Now, mind you that all of these technologies, whether it's social technology and fintech and biotech and environmental tech, all these technologies, and there you have in the corner the metaverse. All of these technologies abide within the eco-habitat. They're sitting there collectively together. Some have billions of dollars being contributed to it. And some have already had billions of dollars of investment. Some have made it to market. Some have regressed into winter, have found itself from a peak of inflated interest into the trough of disillusionment. And some are collecting, and some have more valuable data by way of failed data in this trough. And some have afforded those that have had the means and the capacity to go into this trough of disillusionment of failure and to start going onto the slope of enlightenment. I'm talking about Garner's hype cycle, the framework. And they've taken these technologies and some have become product. Some have become part of the incremental shifts and leaps that we just mentioned earlier. But all these technologies abide within the eco-habitat. Just welcome me. There's so much more to cover on this. And we have e-commerce and property and maritime tech, all of these. And here's the deal. None of them are dormant. Some may only have millions of dollars of investment. Some have billions. Some even just hundreds of thousands. Some is research capital that's been invested into this, injected into this. But it's human capital contribution that's been helping develop this. And we go from geospatial tech to smart cities and agri-tech, and all these technologies abide within the habitat. But what happens when they scale and pair together? Food tech and travel tech, sports tech, ethical tech, emotion AI effective computing. When these technologies that abide within the eco-habitat begin to scale together, and the list goes on, as you can see. And I put retail tech as the last one, because that's the most involved one. That's the one that's most colloquial and familiar to us all. And in some ways, and in some capacity, that's the one that matters the least. It's the most defined at the moment. But all these technologies abide within the greater eco-habitat, and they're coming together to what we call the merge pairing. Now, what happens when you take all of those technologies that we just saw, 270 plus, and you pair those together? On a Morpheus scale, we do not completely know what they'll render out to. Many of the world's greatest minds, when it comes to XR and AI, don't understand the full capacity of what's happened just as of late in the past 9 months when it comes to the arrival of generative pre-trained transformers. But what happens when you pair all these technologies together? What we're seeing, everyone, is the fundamental construct of the smart city itself, ecologically. But when these technologies come together, such as immersive technologies and artificial intelligence, pairing together what we're calling immersive intelligence, and that terminology isn't new. I was talking about this advising Microsoft years ago on the Redmond campus. That's not new. But when these paired technologies come together, which are being defined, now these pairings come together with other pairings, and that's what we call true technological convergence. And that's a game change. And what we see happening right now with the advent, rise, and launch of these technologies that are just seemingly show up on the scene, where you'll take an NFT of all things that started in 2011, BitDNS, goes through its cycle of development and progress and color coins and counterparty and Ethereum 2015. It goes through 720, 1155 ERC standards, if you will, goes through natural progression. All of a sudden, it shows up on the scene because we've become more virtual in the past 40 months than we had the past 40 years in the past. And you see these technologies show up on the scene, and all of a sudden they're here and they become products and they become wild, highly unregulated. Much of the process is unethical, and they become multi-billion-dollar platforms based on these sciences that are highly potent, that have been configured and put together and introduced in such a way, in such a capacity of on the blockchain and other technologies that help usher in these technologies, these subsets, if you will. Now, we're not talking about all those technologies today. Today, we come to convene on just two, because we must take in consideration there's only two technologies, there's only two things within all the eco-habitat that impacts each and every one of those 270 plus technologies. There's only two. It's artificial intelligence, influences every single technology within the eco-habitat, and human intelligence, human culture. When we talk about extended reality, we're also talking about AI. An extended reality, extended intelligence from human intelligentsia. And why this matters when we talk about this intersection of humanity and technology is that we are such a disruptive society, global world, that we have the capacity to disrupt our own selves and to out-innovate our own selves. I'm not talking about Terminator AI. I'm talking about AGI, superintelligence, but not just as a standalone, but paired with all these other technologies that abide within the eco-habitat. That the technology will become so advanced that the technologists cannot understand and cannot keep up with its cadence. It's a disruptor unlike anything we've ever seen before. But as technologists, we are so fascinated by innovation. It's so much of what drives us in work and enthusiasts, that we are in a situation where policy cannot create policy, legislators cannot legislate because they do not understand what this is, and there's an ethical dilemma here. We'll touch on some of that. But for right now, I want to digress because I believe that it's always important in these settings to talk about the ethnography, the history. We tend to talk about what's now, but we haven't really had an appreciation for all that we're involved with now when it comes to these emerging technologies. It has its beginnings. And there are those who, some are still here on this earth and some aren't, that have contributed substantively to the innovation of the baton that's been passed down to us today. And as we yet sit here today, we will undoubtedly pass, if you will, pass the baton, as we're doing actually right now, pass this baton to others that will come after us, to take what we've inherited and to give what they've inherited ultimately from us. The super brief history of XR, it dates all the way back to the 1800s, but in some ways you can go all the way back in the time of the Grecians. I've done some writings about that. But we won't go too far on this. I wanted to make sense and be more understandable and not go too deep with it. But it goes to the 1800s. I heard someone earlier, they were talking about stereoscopic technology. Without stereoscopic technology, today's world of immersive technologies would not be what it is. Again, we tend to look at product, but let's look at science and let's look at the things that are developed from science, of applied science. Stereoscopic technology is a fascinating thing. Pygmalion Spectacles was a book, and it made mention of these spectacles that you could use in consideration of thinking about it, looking at VR, if you will. It is a time and a thing of novels, but from novels and dreams manifest product. In the 60s and 80s, we go into, and so that was the visionary age. Around when we look at the Industrial Revolution, which we'll touch on as well. But now we're talking about the prototypical generation, the telesphere mass virtual interface environment workstation. Then didn't go into the 1990s and 2000. And remember, 60s, 80s, this is where you had NASA Ames. You had those building in all different types of places you wouldn't visit. NASA going off in the sun, moon, and stars. Well, NASA was very credible for creating a lot of things that we value and benefit today when it comes to XR. And there are still people around that were there that have done and written incredible paperwork on some of these things, and thinking about the trajectory where we're at when it comes to virtual and augmented reality in particular, if you will. But then we go into the 1990s and 2000s, we turn into product and we go out there, kick the tires and say what works, what's good for market, both private and public sector. And mostly, for the most part, in the 90s, there was a lot of fail that came, a lot of fail. But then came the gaming world, which continued to scale. And a lot of them a lot of technologists then looked at the gaming world as in some ways, was the vehicle platform for us to have success that are entered into XR. And some trajectories were completely and grossly off, but some were very accurate. When we start talking about human factor fidelity and hyper-realistic immersive simulated environments, and thinking about these human factor fidelities of cognitive fidelity, spatial fidelity, thinking about perceptual sciences, environmental fidelity, contextual fidelity, intentional, unintentional fidelity, all those things when it comes to mattering in terms of the actual experience in which we ingress into, we access, and begin to automatically educate ourselves on, consciously, unconsciously. And that's when we start talking about really getting into perceptual sciences, which is the majority of where that money has gone to. Let's say for Meta, the billions of dollars of investment, the majority it goes into that is for the most part dealing with perceptual sciences. But that's a whole different thing in the narrative that we could touch on. But I want to move forward because we have a lot to cover. And so we go into clinical VR and military adoption. People like Skip Rizzo, they're doing incredible things when it comes to PTSD and decompression therapy and all these different things, if you will. And learning how does this technology work, specifically, let's say with our service women and men, our frontline workers, and how is it adopted? How is this working out for them? And what can we use now today with visual development therapy to be able to help make their experiences better, more calming and comforting? And can we use this as for medicinal purposes? And so there was a lot of things that were happening when it came to clinical and military adoption. But then we go into 2010s and 2020s, which we go hardcore into Kit and Core and Vuforia and all these other different platforms we've heard of, and obviously Unity and Unreal, with the incredible things that both of those camps, if you will, are doing. And then we see a huge deployment of HMD distributed and headsets. And now we're going even further in, and we're seeing startups getting massive funding like we've never seen before, such as Magic Leap, over $6 billion in investment to be able to give a college effort shot, if you will. It's a heck of a college effort to build something that could come into product. And so there's been billions of dollars that goes into investing in towards these platforms. And people say, oh, Magic Leap is a fail. Well, it may have some part of a failed data, but there's so much data that they're using to help make it right so that it could be synchronous to the experience of this spatial world. And so even with failure, there's great wealth. So that still matters. And so some of these companies that have gone down and that you don't see, they've contributed substantively. Even if you look at platforms like Gavin Wilhite and Sebastian Bruce and all of them were building with AltSpace. AltSpace was a great contribution towards the progressive scale of XR, but it certainly has seen its day, and it served its purpose. But as we move forward, we go into a super brief history of AI, which I think is important as well, because AI has obviously taken the world by storm in a capacity. And look, we're only at 18 and 19% of adoption when it comes to AI. We're not even a global adoption. That's public and private sector figures. We haven't even seen what mass adoption looks like. And here we are a couple of months removed from November when ChatGPT, if you will, announced AI. Now, AI wasn't new. We had simple AI that was all over the place. But now we've gone into generative technology, which is very interesting in and of itself. And we'll touch on that in just a moment as well. So we have the 1940s to 50s, the Turing test. And Turing comes out and says, hey, in order to be able to tell whether AI has reached AGI, it should be able to function well, we should be able to communicate with it, and we communicate with it, and it communicate with us. And in many ways, there's a great debate happening with the world, and some say the Turing test has been accomplished. Some say the bar of the Turing test is moving upwards, and some say that the standards in which Alan Turing was using back in the 40s was not in consideration of the type of technologies in the scene that we would see when it comes to AI's growth in the present day to 2023, if you will. And the real debate will come down to whether AGI has arrived and whether we're still dealing with just simple GPT. And the reality is that AGI, in some ways of glimmers, it has not fully arrived. Remember, this conversion, this 2.5 conversion, if you will. Web3 hasn't fully arrived either. A lot of these platforms that say that they're decentralized are really centralized. We're in this technological convergence of 2.5 subsequent 3.0. Same thing when it comes to AI. We're in a conversion. We're seeing glimmers. In the birthplace of AI, they call it artificial intelligence, Dartmouth conference. A group of guys came together in Dartmouth and said, we're going to name it AI. I said, okay, good. Then we have Dendril and Mycin dealing with the study of bacteria and dealing with chemistry, if you will, Stanford campus. And then you have logic theorist and general problem solver, which I encourage anyone to take a look at that and go Google that and look that up. It's very fascinating things. It may seem boring to you, certainly not to me. And I don't think it would be boring to this audience here, understanding natively how close we were to its very advanced AI had it not been the plugs been pulled, especially in Stanford with Dendril and Mycin, which is very fascinating. And general problem solver is just so spot on and apropos to today's way of looking and the way we look at things. We'll get to your questions in just a moment too, after we get done at the end of this as well. Definitely hold on to some of those, please. But then we go to the 1990s and the 2000s, And then we find ourselves in AI winter. Things get really bleak, and then we get with bat propagation, which Professor Hinton, Jeffrey Hinton, who's probably one of the most advanced minds in the world when it comes to AI, who just the guy that was in the news back in spring, who left Google and said that, hey, AI serves as an existential crisis potentially, and there's a big deal happening, And when Jeffrey Hinton, Professor Hinton speaks, it's a really big deal, especially since one of his students, Ilya Sutskever, is who most suspect within OpenAI is the one that ultimately created these generative pre-trained transformers, GPT, as we call it for short. And that he was a student. Ilya was a student under Professor Hinton. And without bat propagation technology, within the use case for AI, the ability to be able to go back and to be able to render out and to X out what's not working and what does work, without that, you don't have today's AI. And so it's a really big deal. And that was a huge milestone. And because of that, then it helped usher us and accelerated that. That was really a focal turning point, if you will, for 1990s and the 2000s. And then we go into IBM's Deep Blue, and we start talking about Watson and all those things that are happening. And there was great advancement with that, with IBM. It was almost surprising that they didn't come out with the GPT first, but they've done a really good job when it comes to simple AI. They help lead and catalyze in the world. And that's what you could expect from IBM. In some ways, they really have some really heads down development when it comes to experimentation. They're one of the best on the planet. People may not know that because you don't tend to hear them as a huge product hit maker anymore. But what they have in laboratory is very compelling, and they're incredibly innovative, and they have some brilliant minds there. And so I certainly doff my hat to them. But then we see natural language processing, and then machine learning, and so forth and so on. And so we saw all these different technologies, all these acronyms come into the scene. We're all wrapping our minds around it. What do all these things mean? Neural networks and all of that. And so that's what that is. And so that kind of gives us a super brief history of AI. Now you take those two together, pair those together, and then that's what brings us into the merge pairing. The new era of human-machine symbiosis, that's exactly what we're seeing now in today's present time. This era of machine symbiosis is that ultimately what we're building when it comes to AI is how can we not only create a duplicate self of us and create intelligent avatars. Yeah, I hear that. And that's something we've been talking about for years. We've been talking about intelligent avatars that have the capacity to be able to operate within these virtual spaces in interoperable spaces. I heard you all talking about the dog earlier. It's like, yeah, will that dog be able to carry over from one space to the other? And that's the intention as we talk about interoperations. Being able to carry your avatar with everything that you own virtually, and to be able to go from anybody's environment in the open metaverse and to be able to operate within that. And so that was part of the intent, and part of what we looked at specifically from XR community in particular is that we looked at this new era of human-machine symbiosis is how can I extend my human intelligence and have that involved into an avatar that can carry forth and go forth and that could represent me in Zoom sessions, Blue Jean conferences, Cisco WebEx meetings, so forth and so on. To the point where they announced last year, I think most people missed the biggest breakthrough. What I consider the biggest breakthrough for AI isn't GPT. The biggest breakthrough from AI was a glimmer of what we saw when it comes to the Kodak avatars, which was last year that Meta announced, and spending some of those billions of dollars. They announced the Kodak avatar, which is the capability to be able to scan yourself. That's nothing new, 3D scan, but to scan it and indiscernible to the human eye of your actual self, and to control that is to suspend that in real time with deepfake technology. It's one thing to do deepfake technology and put it and launch it on an MP4. It's one thing to be able to control and suspend deepfake technology in real time as your actual self. That was a huge breakthrough, because now we're talking about the likeness and who owns that within these virtual spaces, your actual copied self. And obviously we have the capability to be able to clone your voice within 7 minutes or less. So that's a really big deal. But that's not the true era that leads us into human-machine symbiosis. And speaking of era, let's take it there for a second, because one of the things I want to talk about when we talk about immersive AI as an extension of ourselves is not just avatar form, but we're also talking about integrating this within our own selves. And in a lot of ways, the idea has never been to just stare and touch at our devices. That's never been the intention of technical development. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to understand not where we're at now today and where we might be headed, but understand, to look back and say, where have we come from, to understand where we might be headed. And the idea was for us not just to steer our devices, but to one day operate within them. And so you have this extension of ourselves, yes, but to also integrate these technologies and to embed within these vessels in these bodies itself, within this head cavity, this brain, if you will, is what they're attempting to do, to be able to hack the brain, to be able to integrate these type of technologies within it. We could touch on more on that. We got a lot more to cover, but we talked about this era, if you will, and we need to take a pause for a second, to go back for a second. We come through the farming revolution. We come to the industrial age revolution. We come through, and that's the first industrial age revolution. Then we come to the second industrial age revolution. Then we come into the information age of the 90s, if you will, the technological age. And then we go through the applications renaissance. And then we come into what we're heading into now is the AI revolution, which is a game change for so many different reasons. Some will call it Web 4, some will call it Web 3. And now, firmly fixed, my understanding, the AI revolution. And put it, fill in wherever you want and refine it however you will. We're heading into an age of extended artificial intelligentsia. And so there's a lot that comes from that. And we'll take a pause here because when we talk about reimagining the human experience, this is where we say at this moment that if we're going to extend reality, then we must bring reality with it. And part of the concern is that we're leaving humanity out of the equation. We've gone from ideation stage to hardware progression to software progression. But the natural progression is humanity itself. That if we're going to extend reality, then we must bring reality with it. And the idea of extending reality with it is taking consideration for humanity standards. That's when I architect the 8 standards of the metaverse, which was 7, but then we added the 8th on there. Dealing with humanity first, accessibility, education, equality, community development, safety, privacy, wellness, and ethics. These essential focal points for how we build technology and technical progress is inherently incredibly important. To take in consideration from the farming revolution to the AI revolution, to look and to consider that in the 90s, what happens? What did we think would happen when the information age came about? We got a ton of information and we began to do what we naturally do. We began to innovate. We received the information in this cross conversion. It wasn't just boom, the industrial age is done and boom, the information age is here. That's not how that goes. It overlaps. They overlap. And what happened is we got all this information and then that led us ultimately to the bubble because we were operating our startups with industrial age way of business. That doesn't help, that can't happen. It leads us into the Great Recession, helps catalyze that. But then from that, in that hour, a man comes on the stage by the name of Steve Jobs in 2007, September, and introduces a device, and he called it an iPhone. And from that, we saw this flurried frenzy of activity, especially here in Silicon. Most of the offices were still empty, so many of them. And the application renaissance came in. People were losing their jobs. People didn't want to be relying and go back to work in Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies. They came out and huddled around the corners, around tables, and decided to create startups. So we saw a startup explosion happen on the scene, global. But here's the point. Once we began innovating and hacking and building these applications, what we really did by creating these applications is we democratized access itself for the common woman, the common man. And then we began to innovate with these democratized tools. We took it from not having to have a high budget to afford even a camera. We took it to where we just have a simple calculator, simple things at our hands, and technology began to speed up and began to progress even more. And then ultimately what happened is we started to see these technologies come on the scene, and we became reliant on these technologies when we had to go into lockdown. We became virtual with these tools. Some are just sitting on the shelf. You go from 10 million users to 400 active million users on a place like Zoom. We began to see that it goes into high capacity. We used cloud capacity computing, unlike anything Azure and Google Cloud and AWS. We started using cloud for what it is and what its intention was.
And we were able to do that. Without cloud, we won't be here right now having these conversations, but we're able to take advantage of that. Now we see edge technology going even faster in the render. But here's the deal. We're moving at such a fast speed, at such a fast pace, that we're now having to reimagine what these technologies look like now that they're entering and coming together. It's not a single variable equation. Yes, we get a lot of information for generative pre-trained transformers today and content and copy content, but we also have to consider that there's been people that have been chopping wood, not just here in the Valley, but elsewhere on computer vision. We're start thinking about multimodalities. Now it could see, not just give you rendered out content. Now we start thinking about vertical access, not just horizontal data that's been scraped and introduced to us and leads towards disinformation and misinformation, which is a really big deal because right now, as we speak, the ecosystem of information is threatened. And so we must at some point start getting the information from these individual verticals and start creating education GPT, accessibility GPT, legal GPT, health GPT, and to be able to silo that out. But here's the deal. As it's been said, XR is the interface for AI. And so for all of these GPTs and these and especially with what you see happening with NVIDIA, giving us the capability to be able to democratize access to build out our own siloed GPTs, not just auto GPT that's hanging out in Linux, but giving us the capacity to be able to build these things out. Now, all of a sudden, all that we're building out with these information databases, deploying and distributing this information that hopefully becomes more accurate, deploying that, now imagine ourselves interacting and operating within that ecosystem of information itself, which is the game stage. It brings us to the dawn of a new technological renaissance, where these things that were novel now are come to pass, now that they're here, and now we've reached to a new height, which ultimately brings us into Web 4, bring us through that conversion from 2.5 to 3, which we still have a long ways to go, 3 to 4, AI operations, and ultimately to 5, which we're talking about when it comes to physics, which many of us just do not know and understand that. Remember, we're taking science, creating product, and taking these products to understand science even more and unlocking that in this new dawn of technological age. So emotional resonance and digital empathy, taking into consideration that we that operate within these virtual spaces are governed and imbued with the responsibility to take ethics as a very serious focal point on how we operate with colloquial governance, which leads us into the animated economy. Now that you have these virtual worlds that are showing on scene, and they're becoming even more smart on how to do it, but many of them have failed. Part of the problem is that they created a virtual world, they opened the doors and said, come in, have fun. Nobody wanted to do that, so they shut down. They didn't have the capacity and the bandwidth to be able to afford all this cloud computing, to keep the lights on with some of these very stunning virtual worlds. Because the better approach, what we come to find out, is through humanity, which we should go further and say human centricity. Creating community, then building a virtual world around that, in that fashion, and in that direction, humanity first. See, here's the deal. You cannot escape humanity when it comes to us developing and building these technologies, because in a lot of ways, it's fueled and fed by that. Without humanity, without people, you don't have AI. Without any of these technologies, if you don't have people, you don't have an extension of reality itself. Because what are you extending from? So in terms of its operation and its scope. So when we look at emotional resonance and digital empathy, it's understanding the culture, the ecoculture, these human characteristics that are permeated in and throughout technological ecosystems themselves, understanding what it means of humanity's role within the eco-habitat, its influence, how it governs and guides, and empathy is needed to come on this scene. And that's what brings us into the intersection of humanity and technology. Said all that to say this, in capacity, that when we meet at this intersection, it's not that they're just coming together and that they're here. It's how it takes us forward. How will we operate and navigate within these ecosystems? And what does that mean for human sustainability? Yes, we will need universal basic income. No, UBI is not welfare. Yes, we will need universal basic income because we need to make sure that we're assuring that while we're innovating, we're not out innovating ourselves into poverty. We see what's happened when it comes to the writer's strike. Billions of dollars have already been affected. Multiple industries have been impacted by this. We're seeing disruption when it comes to generative AI art. Many people are using these democratized tools. They're not hiring our artists like we used to, but artist preservation is so essential towards technological progress itself, because you can have art without technology, but you cannot have technology without art. We have to make sure that we have a way to be able to preserve and sustain our artist community, our liberal arts. Even Steve Jobs, even Apple got on stage and said, hey, this intersection of technology and liberal arts is key. It's essential. It's a big part of what we do when it comes to tech. So we can't just leave it in terms of innovation and out-disrupt ourselves. So at this intersection of humanity and technology, we have the ways to be able to create sustainable impact for human betterment. It's one of the reasons why we just announced this summer the Human Capital Initiative, or $300 million initiative that we launched with Gatherverse and If and Immersive and other different platforms that are doing incredible things at this intersection, because we have to be mindful of what's beyond the horizon when it comes to technology, envisioning the future, and ensuring that we're integrating ethical considerations into everything that we do, and that we're integrating the considerations of wellness, not just physical wellness in terms of body wellness and ailments. That's super important, obviously, but mental wellness as well, youth mental wellness, thinking about in consideration of accessibility. Can everybody access these platforms? Does everyone have an opportunity to use them and to innovate? And thinking about education, these platforms, no doubt, are educating people. A very disturbing report came out earlier this summer when it came into UN, and the UN came out and says the ecosystem information is now threatened because there's so much erroneous information that's coming from GPT. It sounds good, it sounds compelling, but it's not erroneous. It's not even to where it's accredited to. That could be suspect as well. So we have a consideration right now. We right here, part of our responsibility as technologists is no longer just to create product, but it's what are we doing to sustain what it is that we've innovated this far. Our predecessors weren't necessarily confronted with these because it wasn't globally adopted in the way it is now, but this is something that we've inherited along the way, along the pathway of innovation. And so AI as a catalyst for creative exploration is a really big deal that leads us into navigating the ethical implications. So here's where we start to wind down. We've had the eco-habitat, we have this growth, we have the merge pairing, we have artificial intelligence, and we have extended reality. No doubt that this is the sandbox in which we're getting ready to play in, and this is where we're bringing the world in to operate within. What's next? Here's what's next. When it comes to GPT, we're already going to see great commercial adoption, but we do not completely know in real time what this looks like until we at least get to the 50% mark of adoption globally, and we haven't. Part of the consideration is not everyone even has common broadband and Wi-Fi access to culturally compute their cultural contributions towards this narrative as a whole. A lot of what we're seeing is going to be biased content and development and material that's going to come out by way of this technology, because some companies and some platforms are already working at ludicrous speed, while some haven't even had a chance to even adopt yet. And so we're going to see some shifts and change in terms of people that are going to be losing their jobs, and we're going to find positions that were not as relevant as they used to be. Why do I say this? Because remember, we talk about regenerative technologies. We even talk about regenerative agriculture and sustainable farming and things like that. This word regenerative. Remember, in order for something to regenerate, there must be a progenerator. There had to be something that progenerated. And whenever we see regeneration, the farming revolution, industrial revolution, information age, when we saw that bubble happen, it was a regeneration happening at the self-same time. But when there's regeneration, there must be a degeneration. When the print press came into the scene decades ago, many people were out of a job. Many processes were disrupted, because we're still talking about disruption. Many processes were disrupted, and all of a sudden, what came to pass is that the print press dominated the scene for decades to come. So what happens? Through degeneration, people will lose their jobs. New jobs will be created. New opportunities will be created. When it comes to XR, we're really still in our infancy. We're not even really in our infancy. We're still really in the womb. We've only developed sight. We're probably in the second or third or embryonic stage, if you will, let alone the trimester. XR hasn't even begun to even nearly see its capacity of what it is. We're still in building blocks. But when these technologies come together, AI will accelerate the development of that. So expect to see incredible things come down the pipeline by way of AI-powered machinery. This is the way that we're heading. But within this, and this is important, navigating the ethical implications. Each of us have to be mindful that we need to have ethical considerations for how we go forth building it. That's a whole different conversation I'm happy to have, but we need to start thinking ethically sound, because we can possibly out-innovate ourselves because people won't be able to afford our products when it comes to market. The human potential that's unleashed. We often talk about that, and I put a question mark on there. Is this really human potential that is unleashed, or is this human degradation? That question has not been answered yet. Yes, we have been empowered by these new technologies that come to scene, but to what end and to what threat might we find ourselves adopting these things? We're not raising the flags of alarmist and just sounding an alarm bell for no reason. Professor Hitton's not just quitting Google and talking about the existential crisis that could happen, because we're talking about things that are very real, that are very serious, and some are really hard to come back from, especially when you're threatening the ecosystem of information. That's a really big deal. But moreover, when we talk about operating within a virtual space at human eye resolution level, and we talk about, oh, Roddenberry. Which version of the metaverse are we referring to? Roddenberry's holodeck? Are we referring to Ernest Cline's Oasis, the ontological anthropocentric simulation immersive system? Are we referring to Neil Stephenson's version of the metaverse? What are we really talking about when we talk about this virtual environment and interacting with it as people? And how do we operate in relation to one another? We must take an ethical consideration, but the human potential, is it unleashed? The human potential for disaster? It could be. We talk about the alignment problem with AI, and I'll be done with this. We talk about the alignment problem. And one of the things that they've talked about with the alignment problem is ultimately when AI gets the AGI or even superintelligence, will it align with human values? But my question is, if it does align with human values, whose values? Vladimir Putin's? Whose values will AI ultimately align with? And how will it carry forth its dictates, its mission, its objectives, its agenda? What will happen? So right now, we're at a time right now where it could be very frightening, it could be very inspiring, but no doubt that we have been given the small opportunity and chance to carry this fire, to pass it down to generations to come. Might we consider, at this intersection of humanity and technology, to keep humanity first in all of our innovations and all of our development and product delivery teams, deploying what's good for human betterment and human betterment for all of us? Thank you for your time. I'm happy to go into a Q&A if anyone has any questions.
Feel free to raise your hand, and we can go over the questions. Yeah, Eureka.
Hi, thank you so much, Christopher, for this speech. This was incredible. I have learned so much, and I've been inspired and also kind of set in reality as far as like what the capabilities and possibilities are if we are not ethically sound and aware of this. So thank you very much for that. I do want to know your perspective on the evolution of quantum computing in combination with AI and what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so we're dealing with the ones and twos, right?
Yeah.
We start talking about quantum computing and with AI, and that's a really good question, because I think ultimately the road leads to quantum, as you and I know. And with quantum, it's going to allow us to be able to get further to unlocking and understanding things of physics that are just sitting right in front of us, relativity and space-time continuum. I believe that AI will have an influence in terms of developing the tools it's going to take to have functional quantum computing. But here's the deal. Even when we have, let's just say Microsoft, because they're all working on it, but Microsoft, we'll just use it as an example, comes on and says, hey, we have quantum computing, it's ready.
That won't even reach market for at least the next 36 to 48 months. Not even going to happen. All I think that today's AI will allow us to do is to be able to be tools to get us further to understanding what quantum computing truly is for consumption and for the consumer world. That does bring in concern because, you know, there's one thing to have this, as you know, this one vertical technology. AI is moving as fast as it is, but now putting in capacity, marrying and pairing, remember we talked about merge pairing AI with quantum computing, candidly, I don't even think the world's best minds that are working on this, that's their full-time job, can even wrap their mind around that. Because remember the human brain study that came out in Europe, I encourage you guys to take a look at that, and all of you guys and gals take a look at that. The human brain study is a 10-year study that came out in Europe. And it really said, okay, let's take the human brain in comparison to the fastest computer in the world at the time was in China. And what they ultimately came out with is, yes, the computational render is in some ways faster than human brain, but let's not get it twisted. The human brain far outpaces any type of computer on the face of this earth. Even in terms of computation, because we're dealing with senses, and even AI doesn't have that. We tend to think that AI is competing with the human brain, not in any kind of fashion because of artificial neurons. No way, not even close to it. But it gets its pattern and its dictates from the human brain itself. And so I said all that to say is, what happens? We're just trying to wrap our mind around the computational rendering and the adjustment and the centralization when it comes to these type of technologies. But what happens when you take quantum computing and pair that with AI, what that renders out to in terms of information, but moreover, what is the impact of that information that's now deployed? And it goes back to the alignment issue. That's not just something that abides here in North America or Europe or certain parts of Africa or Southeast Asia, Asia, South America, Central America. That gets into the hands of some bad actors that are out there. And they have whole fleets of hackers and people that can do a lot with this. It's one thing to talk about these technologies, but in this capacity, but what happens? Okay, let's just take a crack at it. Fine. You asked the question. I think it's a great question. Let's run this for a second. What happens when, you know, because we tend to think of existential crisis as nuclear war. Okay, but what happens when you have a country out there by way of physics that has now the capability to be able to deter a nuclear warhead? That means reverse Oppenheimer's work. I had the capacity by way of physics to be able to reverse that destruction of two atoms coming together. And if one country in the world has that power and they have an arsenal of nuclear warheads, they essentially become one of the most powerful destructive potential forces on the planet in terms of military. Military AI is widely being adopted now and has been for some time, but it's accelerating and going even faster. But you put quantum into that, and we're unlocking things that we haven't even in some ways fathomed, let alone the 270 plus technologies within the eco-habitat. Quantum computing starts to answer questions fairly quick. So who will deploy that to the world? And as we see what happened with GPT, Auto GPT came out. And that's not a product that's necessarily offered by a company. That's something that's on the hacker level, and that's real. I hope that addresses your question in some capacity.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate that thorough answer and explanation. Well, it's crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have some hands that are up as well.
Yeah. I think that ChatGPT, in terms of artificial intelligence, is just the tip of the iceberg. I think one of the big things that's missing from it is any sort of common sense or reasoning capability. And for example, Rodney Brooks has talked about, a robotic researcher has talked about how people are now working on using traditional AI techniques to add that reasoning capability to these large language models. But I think there are three really big things that are coming, and it's going to affect us quite a bit. One is when these programs are able to reprogram themselves. I don't think we're really there right now, but you know, people are working on that. And the other sort of consequence of that is patents. Right now, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office will not grant a patent to something that was generated solely by artificial intelligence. And I think what's going to happen as reasoning is added to these models is that these artificial intelligence systems are going to start coming up with huge numbers of patents. And I think that either the U.S. patent system can adapt to that and start granting the patents, or the U.S. patent system can just become irrelevant. And I think the patent system is extremely important to our entire business infrastructure. And so if we don't adapt to that, we're going to have some problems. And so that's the second thing. The third thing I think is, I worked in a lot of different industries, and I'm familiar with the military industry. And I think that the third thing is going to be speed. And that is, these artificially intelligent systems are going to be able to react very, very quickly to threats. And right now, the Pentagon, I was just watching a program about this, a documentary about this morning. Right now, the Pentagon has a policy whereby the human always has to be in the loop. But I think there's going to be a strong incentive for militaries to use artificial intelligence systems that can react much more quickly than humans can. And I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying there's going to be a large temptation to do this, to just set the artificial intelligence systems loose and let them react as quickly as they can to threats. Because on the other side, you may have an opposing country that is going to do that. And so how are you going to compete with them? So I think those are three really big things that are coming. And we're sort of on the precipice of those things right now. Maybe the next 5 years. It's hard to tell. I'm an engineer, and I know that when you try to predict technology development, one of the big problems is that you don't know what you don't know. And so things tend to take longer than you think. But I think those three things are coming.
Sure. And thank you for sharing that. And there's two things on that real quick. One, the patents. I think the problem with patents right now is that we have a North American bias, and we think that the globe will honor that, which we know that they don't.
Yeah.
Take an example of what we saw happen, and Brian Chesky talked about this with Airbnb, that there was a platform in Europe that cloned Airbnb, and they did it successfully. And because, I know we're talking about patents, but let's talk about proprietary systems as well.
Sure.
And they cloned Airbnb, and they offered to sell this company to Airbnb for $600 million. One of the things that Warren Buffett talks about the Buffett rules, and talking about, do you have a moat as a startup founder? Do you have a way to be able to make sure that your company cannot be duplicated with a company that has a burn rate equal to yours or better than yours, to be able to outpace you, outdo you? So the patent community, yes, it's important when it comes to North American business, but the reality is, or American business really, but the reality is, on the global scale, when we start talking about these technologies, it really just doesn't have as much relevancy.
Right.
Because in some ways, we're not just dealing with products anymore, we're dealing with science. And that's the thing when we're talking about AI, and it's very elusive. I'll say this about the third thing you said, I agree with you across the board. The military, when it comes to adoption of AI, one of the things that GPT said, and I thought it was striking, I was in France, I was in Lyon, France earlier this year, watching, or right before I went to my European tour. And Sundar Pichai came out, but I will touch on something that happened in Lyon when I was in Lyon. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, comes out in 60 Minutes interview. You can go take a look on YouTube. It's a good interview. But he's just very mum on so much more that could be said. But he said, we're going to need help of law enforcement. We're going to need government, public sector help for this. We've never seen technology come out where someone says we're going to need the help of law enforcement and government. They come out and say the 60 Minutes interview. When I was in Lyon, you had Sam Altman, founder of and CEO of OpenAI. You had a representative from IBM. You had a professor there, and they're sitting before the United States Congress, and all of them are on the same page saying we're going to need help for government. We're going to need assistance. Why is that? We're not just talking about UBI, government protections, warfare, because they understand that what they put out there, if Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, in some capacity, Xi Jinping, they get a hold of these technologies,
it puts us at a severe disadvantage when it comes to global market. We tend to look at markets, but we have to talk about global threat. And none of that matters if you have military industrialized complex that's aiming and leveraged against you. The markets don't even matter at that point anymore, because they can have a successful market right within their own ecosystems, absent from all these other markets. We see that happen in a large way to the greatest consumers on the planet, which is the United States. And so it puts us in a varied situation. Point being is that AI, the reason that they're partnering with the government, and even the senator from Chicago said, wait, help me to understand this. We're used to chasing people in Silicon Valley and holding them accountable. You mean you're coming to us and approaching us for your help, for our help? And the answer is yeah. And you know what they've done? They've slowed down in some ways the putting out of what the GPT-5 and 6 and 7, all that. It's sitting there, but they've given this information to the government to give government an advantage ahead. So right now, public sector has better AI available to them than private sector, guaranteed. But the thing is, we live in a hacker world, and hackers will hack, and they have that information and all the means to be able to do that, to open source that with the Linux communities and so forth and so on. So it's very interesting and game change disruption and things that you're touching on. But I know we have some more people that have some more questions as well. Their statements.
I think I went to a seminar put on by a famous copyright lawyer. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name right now, but he said, we've had the internet for 30 years and we still have not caught up legal wise to the internet. And he said, will we ever catch up to artificial intelligence? Will the government, in terms of regulation, ever catch up to it? And he said, never, because we haven't even caught up to the internet yet. So they've got a big task ahead of them to catch up in terms of regulations, I think.
And you know what's so great about what you just said? And I agree with that to one sense. Humans and government won't be able to catch up to it.
Yeah.
Because right now, listen, let's just put it out there. A lot of industries, especially even this year in January, I've did several keynotes to education. The guys one coming up next month. And look, they're saying we're not using AI here. And we're not going to use that to outpace us. But the reality is you're going to need AI to catch up to AI.
Sure.
And that will justify and disrupt your way of your prevention, and saying the only way we're able to keep up with this is to have something that can keep up with it on the other side. That's when you're talking about defensive posture when it comes to military.
Yeah.
The reason you justify AI, because people say we don't want AI in the military, it's too late, because you have to deal with opposition. You have to have a way to be able to defend against that. And so yeah, all those drones that are man operated and all that, you just saw what happened with the case study that happened with the AI operated drones. No joke. So we're going to need that. And then back with what Erica expressed about quantum. See, that's the concern, because somebody cracks the code for quantum on the governmental front, even outside of public sector, someone cracks that code to use quantum and pairs that with AI successfully. That is why you see people like Sundar Pichai saying we're going to need law enforcement. We got a potential problem coming on hand. That's why Sam Altman says he's a little afraid. That's very real. This is because they realize that, gosh, we've gone to the product level, but oh wait, we're not touching on product. We're touching on science. We live in a world. Listen, everyone. We live in a world based on a free enterprise, so-called system, in an economy. These are products that we put out there, but science has no respect or regard for product. Those are just systems in which we operate to help sustain and that we use as a way of advancing and learning and educating ourselves. But we're talking about science. That's no hype. There's no fear hype in that at all. We're talking about science, and science at the end of the day will have its way, no matter what. And whoever can unlock that to be able to understand it and wield that type of power, that's why quantum, the race to quantum, is a big deal. And that is the big race happening right now. So that was great questions that are coming up. I think we have another one.
Let other people ask questions.
Erica?
So I know I read something that said that DARPA is heavily invested in brain magnetic interface technology. Do you think that poses a threat to human rights? I know that's kind of like a more vague question, but just in general, what are your thoughts along those lines?
You know, for those that are here, you may not know what DARPA is, but DARPA is part of the government.
And DARPA is a organization that makes some pretty deep, dark stuff within it. I remember attending Hacker Dojo here in Mountain View, where I live, and when I came to Mountain View, I moved to Silicon Valley from the seat of my car, and a bunch of us were living out of this giant hackerspace and living out of our cars in the parking lot. And we would just sit there and hack and make and code, develop, and do all kinds of things, and innovating robots and drones and all that. Super cool, right? Having sessions every day and eating pizza. And they had all these technology classes, and the only way you can go and eat the free pizza, is you have to sit and listen to a session. Yeah, because they said, you're not getting any of this pizza till you listen to what we have to say until the end. But all these people from technology to come in and teach us some things. And so we were innovating in there, and brilliant minds from all over the place. And that was a concern that we had for what happens when these drones that we're having so much fun with, playing around with, what happens when they start using this for warfare, and DARPA would come on the scene and start plucking off hackers, and just because we're getting these minds to come work with them. Like, what do you need an XR designer for in DARPA? Like, how does the metaverse impact warfare? That training simulations and things like that started going into that, with the biggest sale to this day, I think it was $450 million headset deployed to military from Microsoft. My point to the essence of what you're saying is that in some ways you can go against it, saying, does DARPA have too much leverage? But in some ways you're asking yourself now, do they have enough as a deterrent in this world that we're working with? So all of these things, you start talking about electromagnetic interface, when we start talking about these type of technologies, it's my assumption that most of what we know of front-facing by way of product has already been widely adopted within not only DARPA, but then other organizations that are specifically geared towards creating these type of deterrents and these type of oppositional tools. But the other part of it is that we have to realize that, back to science, what capacity and capability has been unlocked that none of us know of right now? And who has unlocked it where in this world? This certainly isn't a controlled environment. There are militaries that have great capabilities just like we do, very smart minds just like we do. And so this is where we have to make a plea for peace. A plea for peace, and really saying, listen, we'd like to be able to have a universal agreement when it comes to AI and standards. It's one thing when we want to regulate the websites, but North Korea does not. They don't care about that. They're not trying to hear that. And the reality is that we've gone so close to the line of science, or really into science, that this is a race that's happening all across the board. And so I think the more important question is not about the individual technologies that can be adopted, but the bigger question is how can we have a universal peace accord where everyone's on the same place, just like we have when it comes to the nuclear proliferation or nuclear treaty. That's how impactful it is, because AI is far more devastating than nuclear warheads.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Presentation, and it's very high level and full of like a futuristic thinking. And recently, I just purchased it, and I about to listen to the audiobook. The book is called The Coming Wave. It was written by the founder of DeepMind, and it talks about I saw a lot of people writing the review of this book. I mean, I haven't really dived into the whole details, but I saw a lot of people are kind of like saying that, oh wow, because I listened to first chapter this book. It says that in DeepMind they pretty much can produce like one product. Before it was 1 month, one product. Now it becomes 1 week, and now it becomes 1 day, several AI products. So pretty much, for example, the founder said that, the writer said that, for example, if in the future we want to learn things, right, and it will be AI will be like our like it will have, we will have like our pocket tutors that follow all our personality, our learning style, and give us all the stuff that we want to learn. So yeah, in that case, nearly all the industry will be affected. And some other people read this book and even have another article. I don't know where I read it, but the summary is that they think this year, 2023, is the last year that human is fully control the world. The next year will be the brand new year. I mean, this sounds frightening, but I mean, what do you think about these types of the transition of all the industry will get impact? And for me right now, because XReality, I've been doing a lot of tutorials and also host events. And I'm always thinking about, yeah, when I see, for example, Ships XR or other like Blender, Unity, they are doing a lot of like AI integration. So all you need to do is type a few sentences, things will pop up instead of you hard code it. And then me wondering what types of future jobs or what types of future talents that then requires some types of, what types of skills need. And for me, I was thinking about, wow, you know, because everything is so easy and it seems like it requires little skills just to hop in. So what the future talents can do and get hired maybe is the person who develop those platforms. So it still requires codes, but not many people will need it for this types, but the people who got hired will require super high skills. So that's kind of my thoughts, and also creators, right? Yeah, I mean, I just kind of like being still learning, and I wanna ask you what's your thinking about the future or even next year, or what types of talents that will be required by the, yeah, what's the future talents need?
Sure, and as you started off saying, and thank you for expressing that, Dominique, is that you started off talking about a book. And look how disruptive the book platform ecosystem is right now. There's more books. The acceleration of deployed books have gone 10 to 20x. Look at the threat of what we see when it comes to platforms like Apple Music and Spotify Music and AI generated music and disruptions for artists. You bring up a really good point. Let's lean in on that for a second. All right, let's go 40,000 feet up, everyone. Let's go together for a second here. So let's look at that. You have now what we're seeing, these multi-trillion-dollar technology companies like Apple, Google, NVIDIA just crossed to that threshold. Here's the deal. You talked about AI. There's more AI in GitHub than there is in human-developed code. There's more AI code. And here's the deal. AI codes better than humans. No doubt. Cleaner, faster, better. These jobs aren't coming back. One of the reasons we talk about the inherent need for universal basic income, it's not a way to be able, it's not unemployment. That's not what this is. We're talking about lifetime capital because we're heading into an innovation renaissance right now. These companies that are and I'm not taking away from them being multi-trillion-dollar companies. On what I'm really saying is that is a good thing. Why? Because these are the companies that are needing to be responsible for UBI. Ultimately, public sector is not moving. A senator said, Marco Rubio, I don't necessarily agree with his politics, but he did say that, he said Silicon Valley is more advanced in technology than the United States government. It's very true. Put whatever technology hub you want to put out there, but it's very true. It could be the Florida market, it could be Silicon Forest, Silicon Beach, Silicon Prairie, Silicon Valley, Silicon Hills, Austin. But what happens is that these companies have become so wide and so far. These aren't just companies anymore. These are small cities. And when you start talking about gaining trillions of dollars, now you're starting to outpace governments. Here in California, we've turned into the 4th largest economy in the world. The 4th, just in California alone. So when we start talking about universal basic income, or what's next, what does this mean, this disruption? What it really means is that we'll have more time on our hands. What it really means is that people need to figure out what will they do with it. But here's the answer. It's really simple. It's not that you're just going to be walking and meandering and walking the earth plane and trying to figure out the essentials of life. Yeah, sure. I get it. I see that. But in terms of work, have you seen the way this world looks right now? Have we seen the poverty that happens in this world? Have we seen the devastating impact of climate? Have we seen what's happened when it comes to drug usage? Have we seen that what's happened when whole entire nations don't even have common broadband and Wi-Fi? A friend from Africa just messaged me yesterday. When I was on tour in Europe, they talk about how bad and the lack of 5G it is. And I hear it all the way in the United States where we have ludicrous speed 5G. But when I go to Switzerland, when I go to France, and when I was in Parma, Italy, all these different places, it's 7 different countries, the Wi-Fi for the most is really bad. It's really slow. What does that mean? That means they're not up to pace where we're at, and some countries are outpacing others when it comes to deployment of information into building. Why does that matter? Because we become more virtual in the past 40 months, in the past 40 years. Here's my point. When we start talking about universal basic income, and we start talking about government help, we need to include private help and private sector and saying how you will spend and how you could spend some of your time on a broadcast level. We'll have a standard level of universal basic income that everybody gets. But if you're giving back and doing better for the world, that puts you in a higher bracket because there's still work to do. That means you may find yourself one day as a developer and engineer making $160,000 to $180,000 per year. You may find yourself disrupted out of employment. You may find yourself on universal basic income picking up litter on a beach. And that's your new job. To reach that higher bracket of UBI income, subsidized through private and public sector deal flow distribution. We have to start thinking about how do we make the best of this. These jobs that we have, a lot of them were never meant to be everlasting. No one got hired at Google. No one got hired at Microsoft saying, congratulations, you're in a position that's everlasting. Congratulations. When you go to college saying you just picked a career that will always be readily available, that's not a thing. That's never happened for the most part. Even in medical practicing, and we call it practicing, even in legal practicing, it was just said that in some ways government has not caught up. We hear it all the time with Gatherverse, at our Gatherverse, right? Which we're friends with XReality. Our Gatherverse community, when I launched Gatherverse in 2021, we were just going to have one event that was surrounding the 7 standards of the metaverse. When I launched Gatherverse, it was the idea just to have one event, maybe 400 people show up and maybe 20 speakers dominate. And as you know, we ended up having over 10,000 people show up, and we had over 100 speakers coming to Gatherverse, and we're now 16 events. We've had the biggest women's group platform meeting, and we're having another one 2024 called Superhero Engine She. We're the biggest event, virtual event for women, metaverse based in the world. It's ever happened. They all just showed up. With Gatherverse, my platform, we have over 79% women that are part of this. Why do I say that? Because we talk about leadership. We talk about eco-contribution. We talk about cultural contribution, the need for equity, the need for equality, the need to make sure that we're looking beyond the limits and bounds, if you will, when it comes to gender-based governance and leadership. And looking at the inherent cultural contribution, looking beyond color, and say who is capable to be able to contribute and their culture from which they come from to be able to contribute towards what we're building and being able to move forward together. We have to move away from these homogenized systems, these monocultural ways of working, and more moving towards polycultural development, because those 270 technologies, those are culturally influenced. And they will only be culturally identifiable towards those and part of those who made it. We are stronger together when we have more culture that influences technological development and integration in, even with the considerations of UBI. It's Dominic, it's a really big concern, because we may have more time in our hands, and that goes full circle to where we started at. This is why it's so important that we have these events. These aren't just a thing of hobby. These communities that we have with XReality community and Gatherverse and Immersive and other, these communities are so important because we're having to find ways to move forward, to innovate at a hive mind, if you will, together. These communities are more important than even technological platforms that are unicorns. Human centricity. At the heart of the metaverse is community. And without a heart, you don't operate. So we're here on this Saturday, and we don't take away from those that could be here. I'm speaking to audiences of thousands. We have many people coming to our Gatherverse events, and I'm afforded the opportunity to go speak all around the world. Did in Europe, did a United States tour this summer. And listening to people, and there are those just like us that do care about what these emergence of these technologies mean for them, for their families, for their livelihoods. So I advocate firmly for community development, community extension, and more of these to better understand, because these learning platforms will help us, because there's really the working world, they don't know what this is. They do not, listen, 18% adoption of AI, that's it. What happens when it gets to 50%? So Dominique, your trajectory saying 2023 versus 2024, we don't necessarily know what's to come, but I'm starting to see the stark reality of that trajectory that you just expressed.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that we need to, because there are so many, I think XR, AI, or all the new technology disrupt technology is amplifying whatever our problem is. For example, poverty. In metaverse, if we didn't solve, or discrimination, if we didn't solve in Web 2.0 to 2.5, then it will be magnified even bigger. The problem will be even bigger when we enter to the even more advanced technology host kind of platform. So I think, and right now, I think a lot of people kind of complain if you have blind app, you can see a lot of Silicon Valley people complain about companies, even though they are in a really good pay and really, cafeteria free food, but they still complain. I think, yeah, maybe, UBI and also all the more automation platforms can really help people to do something that satisfy themselves instead of working for some other people and still need to worry about being unemployed, being laid off, but, stay in the toxic kind of cultures. So I do think that, just like you, I think at the beginning when I host XReality meetup start in 2019, my thought, it was in Burbank. During that time, every time, in LA, every time when I want to join an XR event, I need to drive like 2 hours to Santa Monica. That's why I start XReality. It was in Burbank. I want to have a gathering at least in Eastern, LA, and we don't have to drive. And every Saturday, my thought is that let's gather together and we share, or we talk about XR. Every week, come here, and there's always something to learn, something to share in XR. That's the original thought. And slowly it becomes more like a educational, because sometimes there's nobody or no topic. I have to create some workshops and just to show up and kind of have some topics. So it evolves like that. So I think, just like you said that, sometimes we don't know what's next, but think about our current problem. Maybe we feel the work culture is toxic. We don't feel inspired about every day, Monday to Friday, we feel miserable. Maybe AI, XR can really change, and UBI, universal basic income, can also help us to do something that we feel fulfilled and then make the world better. I think that's a really good answer. Thank you so much.
I agree. It can make the world better. We have to start thinking about these things now. Product delivery teams and developmental workforces, I just would inspire them to consider that there are so many different thousands of people that care about these subjects and matters. I was at a symposium, a social justice symposium in Germany, in Tübingen University. It's very much a feminist university, and I was invited to speak there earlier this year. about what we look at when it comes to AI and it comes to adopting these technologies. And there's brilliant ethicists there. And how do we even integrate ethical considerations into weaving these new products that are coming to market? Like, how do we do that? Because we've been so poor at doing it when it comes to this, and a lot of it has been male-centric decisions when it comes to deploying what we see go to market. And no wonder there's been such a lack of success when it's coming to it. I will say this, that Apple has done a really good job with the Apple Vision Pro. We talked about that earlier when we started, and someone talked about that. And one of the things that they're advocating for is to be able to capture real reality or human experiences. So I have so many cameras on there, it's almost as if they've integrated volumetric capture into these headsets. When that headset gets deployed, I see about 12 months out of its adoption, it will be a game-change way of thinking for how we look at reality and extended reality itself and how we interact with one another. I don't think people really realize, someone had just mentioned earlier, I think it was Jim that mentioned about patents. I think they have over 5,500 patents that are associated with the Apple Vision Pro. And they've only got about 1 million of these coming out, and it's not necessarily for wide market because it's a fairly expensive device. But as I was talking to Jeremy Dalton, my friend, over at PricewaterhouseCoopers, there'll be other different versions that'll be deployed out that'll be more democratized access and affordable. But what I would do is encourage this community, if you can afford to get one, if you can afford an Apple Vision Pro, get that. Start looking at the difference, because you're going to see introduced into the ecosystem. Remember we talked about increment shifts and leaps? We're seeing a shift that's come out when it comes to this headset. We're going to see a difference, and it's going to change the way that we interact with one another. Because Dominique, you brought up a good point as far as you created an event in Burbank and that made it more accessible. Well, what is the point of immersive technology in the first place? Well, part of the first principles of immersive technology is telepresence. It's the idea that I don't have to, listen, I don't know where you fall on the side of this when it comes to back to work. Sure, make it optional, but no one at this point with given technology should be forced to go work in an office and commute to anywhere to junk up the planet. That's just how I feel. I know it's a bit radical, but it's just how I feel. Part of what we've been innovating is to innovate ourselves away from these traffic doomed situations. When we were in lockdown in India, I'm told that you could see the Himalayas again because it removed all the smog and all the smoke and all the gunk that was in the air, and you could see things. They said that they saw dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice. I was in Venice. Venice is very beautiful, most beautiful city I've ever seen. But you could see that. Now, were there really dolphins there? But I bet you the water was clear because it's like taxis on water all over the place, these boats. But if we're able to, by way of telepresence, to be able to immerse ourselves into hyper-realistic, immersive simulated environments in real time, to be able to communicate with each other, haptic feedback, handshakes, and hugs, and to be able to communicate with one another with extreme fidelity, to be able to see every single movement, not just on your face with metahumans, but your whole body, your gestural interface. And that's right. To be able to see each other, Erica, and to be able to say, hi, what's going on, Gigi and Dominique, and to be able to interact with one another, to have that type of deep intercessive communication to where it's emotionally driven, where it's emotionally felt in community environments. To me, this is where we move forward out of hybrid and into fuller reality. But what's happened is we went into lockdown, we became more virtual, but people started going back, and just like someone has the very appropriate descriptor for this, those waves that are coming in, those waves come in, but they recess and they go back out. And so in some ways we went forward, and then we're not going that far with it. But many people stayed. The sands are still wet. Many people stayed in that position, and they're not going back. But you have those that are leadership, because it is multi-generational, and you got boomers that aren't going back either, and Gen Xers not going back, but you have some that are saying, no, we're going back. And some are saying, we can't go back. This is the way forward. Because now, why? Because by way of democratized technology and accessible technology, I have more time to spend with my family. I have more time to spend with my children. Not saying me, I don't have family, I don't have children, not like that. But there are those, how many different people men and women said, I can now spend more time with my kids and help them with their homework before they go to bed. I don't have to go drive and get ready for this 2-3 hour commute back and forth. I'm saving more on money, fuel, food, all of that. But then at the same time, we're not as around people as much either. So there are those that say, we want to go back, we want to be around people, we want to be around community. Well, this is what happens in extended reality, creating ways for us to be able, by way of telepresence, to integrate more in virtual spaces, to have that true fidelity factor. That's why you see platforms like AltSpace, and you're going to see a lot more virtual worlds that are going to sunset and go down because, listen, respectfully, that's my interpretation of the metaverse. AltSpace isn't representing my vision and understanding of extended reality. There is no virtual world platform that exists to this day. I have seen more concepts in virtual environments than most people that walk the face of this earth, and this is very true. I've advised some of the biggest companies in the world that work on these technologies. This is also very true. I have seen things, heard things, some things I can't talk about just like that under an NDA. I will say this, none of the virtual worlds that you see that are in market today are anywhere remotely close to where we're heading to the capability of a virtual world environment. And when we work and there you go, Erica, and you know what I'm talking about. And but it served as a framework, didn't it? For functionality, for body movement, for ingress, egress, all the different things that come with that, to emote, right? To have different type of design, aesthetic considerations, because that has a communication. That's why we need to salvage our artists, because AI isn't just that good at communicating by way of typography and virtual settings and virtual visualizations. All of that matters. It feeds on the senses. And so without all those things, we will not be able to move forward if we become too reliant on AI to be able to fulfill the places where only humans can be able to do it, because we have emotion. AI doesn't have them. AI doesn't know the feeling of the air, of the breeze and the waves on a California beach. They don't feel like that. I wrote a post when I was in a place called Lauterbrunnen. I don't know if any of you have been there or heard of it, in Switzerland. I was there this year. I wrote a post and I shared it in my audience on LinkedIn. I said, I almost forgot about technology. In fact, I did. This place was so beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Ever. Nature. And I said, this is where we extend reality from. This is our point of inspiration. That nature doesn't get its dictates from technology. Technology gets its dictates and its influence and its inspiration from nature, from us, from the environment, ecologically. And so when we look at where we're headed, we need to see of where we already are. We're not creating the metaverse and extended reality to create a new reality. We're creating the metaverse and extended reality to create tools to make the one that we're in now even better. That's the point. We never want to treat this technology as escapism. We want it to be able to create it as a way for preservation and sustainability, to make these realities better. So might it be very appropriate that we reach the point, a zenith, if you will, a turning moment to where we have enough capital to allocate to every single human being and functional governments, and with the hope for others that may not have the functional governments to sustain. And might it be best for us now to stop, pause, and use these tools to make this reality better, to sustain? Maybe that's just a small consideration, just to make it even just a little better, because I am of the fervent belief that when it comes to climate, it's too late. We have a climate summit coming up. I've said it. I put it out there. My cards are out there. It's too late. We've crossed that line. But can we make things a little bit better in some capacity, in some fashion? Sure we can. Who's going to do it? If not us, then who? We're one of the only group of people in the world that understand how to use these technologies to apply it for human betterment. If not us, the government can't do that. It was appropriately said, the government can't even legislate right now. They're having their hands full when it comes to what we saw with the disaster of crypto assets and meme coins. I'm for blockchain usage, but we need to press a reset, and I'll be talking about that publicly soon, that Web3 has ushered us into a place of crime and greed, and it showed us the bad parts. Unfortunately, with innovation, we see the bad parts of what technology represents. But ooh, there's such a good opportunity with it, with real world assets instead of these virtual digital assets, real world one-to-one assets, carrying that within an environment. And when we go into these virtual environments, Erica, this is for you. Everyone walk with us as we come to a close here. When we go into these virtual environments, when we really are ready to go into these virtual worlds, this is what we call the animate economy. And within the animate economy, we have buy, sell, and trade ecosystems. Well, what happens when you establish in any kind of system setting ecologically a buy, sell, and functioning trade ecosystem, barter? What happens when you create that? Now you have to have rules, governing laws. The metaverse has no geographical bounds. It's universal. The global market of consumption, the global deployment of consumption and delivery of goods and assets. Now that we have this buy, sell, and trade ecosystem, now we'll be creating private and public sector governments. Now, think about this for a second. Then I'll probably get out of your way for the moment. Morals. Ethics come from morals. Morals come from individuals, and ethics are agreed upon rules in a colloquial setting. And when you create that public and private sector within that governmental system, that virtual government system, would you imagine that one day, and perhaps soon, that we'll be referring the whole entire virtual systems like we do to cities? As much as we identify Bangkok and London, Cairo, and New York, but we will also refer to that based on a virtual global community world. The answer is yes. We will. A global community, buy, sell, and trade. We have every tool to be able to do it. I imagine one day that I'll be able to go to a farm and I'll be done with this. That I'll be able to go online and there's a farmer and she has a private farm. And she has 360 cameras set up all around that farm. And in extremely, extraordinary high resolution, I can go and tour this farm. In fact, I could go and walk around to it. Real-time transfer of an environment. Call it photogrammetry, but videogrammetry, real-life grammetry. And I'm able to walk around this farm, everyone. And I see an ear of corn that I want, or perhaps some avocados. And I can buy that. And it goes from farm to door. And I'm able to pay for it with a crypto asset that's authentic, a token. And it solidified that transaction on the blockchain. And that transaction is solidified on a blockchain. And I did all that within a virtual environment. We've expanded the global market by then. We're supporting one another and globally in a decentralized fashion. It's a game change. I'm going to express my gratitude and thank you for Dominique, for your gracious invitation to be able to be with all of you today. I really hope in my heart that I was able to say at least something that stirred your mind when it comes to the way that we look forward on the pathway of technology and the intersection of humanity. And that I spoke to the tenets of why we have what we have with XReality. I hope that you could continue to show fidelity to this organization. I hope that you'll take time to connect with me on LinkedIn and elsewhere. And we can have one-off conversations, and I'd like to hear your thoughts future forward. And let me know if I ever can be a value add towards what you're doing. And I really appreciate your time, the remarks that were said. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody want to share anything or say thank you to Chris today? Yeah, I think you inspire us. And I know a lot of people kind of like, for example, every of our XR weekly news, which is before this event, we were talking about AI and what's going on, and we're trying to figure out what can we do. But I think Chris today give us an inspiration. Yeah, we have better technology. We want to make this world better. So if we think this way, I think we don't need to worry about our uninspiring work, jobs, right, being taken away by AI or robot, but we can fully immerse to the world or create something that inspire us, yeah, and make the world better. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christopher. This has been beyond what I expected. You overdid everything as far as my expectations, and I feel highly inspired, motivated, and truly just really, I feel like I'm ethically aware as well of like what we need to do to ensure that going forward, we know what's coming. So this has been amazing. To be honest, I didn't even expect going into this event. This is my first time attending this XR meetup, and I've gone from the previous event to this one, and my mind is blown. So thank you so much, both of you, Dominique and also Christopher. This has been incredible. Like, I can't even express my gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your words are generous and kind, and I definitely wanted to bring my level best. And I've known Dominique for some time, and I've wanted to be here and share some time with her on her platform. And she's one of the best in the business to do it. So thank you for that leadership, Dominique. We all really appreciate and have gratitude. And Jim, for your expressions, and Erica and everyone else. Thank you. It's really heartfelt, and I do look forward to spending more time with y'all, and Deborah and Tom and everyone else that's there, Brenda and Alicia. I appreciate your sentiments, and do right and be good. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.